It started on an ordinary evening, the kind of evening that feels so normal you never imagine it might quietly change something inside you. The house was calm, the lights were dim, and the only sound was the soft hum of the television playing in the background. I remember sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the heavy thoughts that had been following me all week. Life had been overwhelming lately. Work pressure, family responsibilities, and the constant feeling that I needed to keep everything together had slowly drained my energy. From the outside, everything looked fine. But inside, it felt like something was missing. That couch had always been just another piece of furniture in the living room. A place to watch movies, take a quick nap, or sometimes just sit and think. Nothing special. Nothing meaningful. At least, that's what I believed before that night. Because that was the night when something unexpected happened. Something small at first, so small that I almost ignored it. A simple conversation. You know how sometimes the most important moments in life don't arrive with loud music or dramatic warnings? They just quietly slip into your day. That's exactly what this felt like. 1 minute everything was normal, and the next minute I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't done in a long time. The truth is, I'm not someone who talks easily about feelings. I usually keep things to myself. But that night, sitting on that couch, something felt different. Maybe it was the calm atmosphere, maybe it was the sense of safety in the room, or maybe it was just the fact that for the first time in weeks, someone actually asked, "Are you okay?" and waited for a real answer. What started as a casual moment slowly turned into something deeper. The kind of moment where time seems to slow down without you realizing it. Minutes passed, then an hour, and somehow the conversation kept flowing. Stories were shared. Old memories surfaced. Laughter mixed with silence in a way that felt strangely comforting. And that's when I realized something surprising. That couch, that simple, ordinary couch, had quietly become the place where I felt understood again. Not judged. Not rushed. Just heard. Sometimes comfort shows up in ways you never expect. It isn't always a big life-changing event. Sometimes it's just a conversation, a shared silence, or the feeling that someone genuinely cares about what you're going through. But here's the part that changed everything. What started as one simple evening didn't stay just one evening. Days later, I found myself returning to that same couch again. And somehow, each time, the conversations grew deeper. The trust grew stronger. And the comfort I once thought I didn't need became something I started to rely on. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Just two people talking. Just a moment of emotional support during a stressful time. But deep down, I began to realize something else was happening, something I hadn't planned for, and honestly, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. Because sometimes the places where we feel the safest are also the places where the most unexpected emotions begin to grow. And what happened next was something I never saw coming. The strange thing was, nothing about those evenings was planned. There was no schedule, no expectation. It just happened. After a long day, when the house finally became quiet again, I would find myself drifting toward the living room. And somehow, almost naturally, I would end up sitting on that same couch. At first, I thought it was just coincidence. Maybe I simply needed a place to relax after stressful days. Life had been moving so fast lately that I hadn't really taken time to pause and think. Sitting there gave me that pause. The room felt calm, almost peaceful, like a small escape from everything outside those walls. But the truth was, it wasn't just the couch anymore. It was the conversations. They started simple, talking about daily routines, small frustrations, funny moments that happened during the day. Normal things. The kind of conversations people have when they're just passing time. But slowly, without either of us really noticing when it changed, those conversations started going deeper. We talked about things people usually keep to themselves. Old memories. Regrets. Dreams that never worked out the way we hoped. And sometimes there would be quiet moments where neither of us spoke, but the silence didn't feel awkward. It felt comfortable. That's what surprised me the most. I had spent so much time feeling like I had to carry everything alone. Always being the strong one. Always pretending everything was under control. But during those late evenings on the couch, that pressure slowly faded away. For the first time in a long while, I felt like someone was truly listening. Not just hearing the words, but understanding what was behind them. And the more we talked, the more I started to realize something else. Those moments were becoming the part of the day I looked forward to the most. Even when the day was exhausting, even when things went wrong, there was always this quiet thought in the back of my mind: later tonight, things will feel lighter. But that realization also brought a strange feeling with it. A small voice in my head started asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Why did those moments matter so much to me? Why did that simple couch, in an ordinary living room, suddenly feel like the safest place in the world? At first, I tried to ignore those questions. I told myself it was just comfort. Just two people sharing honest conversations during difficult days. Nothing more. But the truth is, sometimes the heart understands something long before the mind is ready to admit it. And one night, something happened during one of those quiet conversations that made me realize this situation might be more complicated than I ever expected. A single sentence was spoken. A simple sentence. But the moment those words were said, the entire atmosphere in the room changed. For a moment, neither of us moved. The room was exactly the same as it had been a few seconds earlier, the same dim light, the same quiet television in the background, the same couch where we had spent so many evenings talking. But something had shifted, and I could feel it. It wasn't what was said alone. It was the meaning behind it. The sentence was simple, almost casual, but it carried a weight that neither of us expected. It made the silence that followed feel heavier than before. I remember staring at the floor for a moment, trying to figure out what to say next, but the words just wouldn't come. Because deep down, I knew that moment had crossed an invisible line. Up until then, everything had felt safe and easy. Two people sharing conversations, helping each other through stressful days, finding comfort in small moments. But now a new question had quietly entered the room. What exactly were these moments becoming? I could feel that same question hanging between us, even though neither of us said it out loud. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, change the subject, and pretend the moment never happened. That would have been the easiest path. Life was already complicated enough, and adding more confusion to it didn't seem like a good idea. But another part of me couldn't ignore how real those conversations had become. Because those evenings weren't just about talking anymore. They had slowly turned into something deeper, something built on trust, understanding, and the feeling of being seen in a way that's rare in everyday life. And that's where the real conflict started to grow. What happens when comfort begins to blur the lines between friendship, support, and something you can't quite explain? Every evening after that felt slightly different. The conversations still happened, the couch was still our quiet meeting place, but now there was an unspoken awareness between us. Neither of us addressed it directly. Yet somehow, we both knew it was there. After that night, the atmosphere between us carried a quiet tension that hadn't been there before. Nothing dramatic had happened on the surface. We still sat on the same couch, still talked about our days, still shared small laughs about ordinary things. But underneath those conversations, something unspoken had started to grow. It was subtle, but impossible to ignore. There were moments when our conversations would suddenly pause, and both of us seemed to realize we were thinking about the same thing, the sentence that had changed everything. Neither of us mentioned it again, yet it stayed in the room like a quiet echo. I began noticing little things that I hadn't paid attention to before. The way the room felt calmer when we talked. The way time seemed to pass faster during those evenings. Even the silence between words started to feel meaningful, like there were thoughts both of us were holding back. And that's when the situation started becoming more complicated. Because outside that living room, life was still moving as usual. Responsibilities were waiting every morning. Daily routines continued. Everything looked normal from the outside. But inside my mind, questions kept building. Was I reading too much into these moments? Or had something genuinely changed between us? Some evenings I told myself it was nothing, that I was simply grateful for the comfort and support during a difficult time. But then there were other nights when the connection felt too real to ignore. One evening in particular stands out clearly in my memory. The house was unusually quiet that night. The television wasn't even on. Just the soft light from a lamp in the corner of the room and the familiar couch where everything had started. We sat there, talking slowly, almost carefully, like both of us were choosing our words with more attention than before. And then the conversation drifted back to that topic again, the one we had both been avoiding. I could feel my heart beating a little faster. Because this time, it felt like we were finally about to face the question we had been silently circling around for days. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The quiet in the room felt heavier than it ever had before. I could tell we were both thinking about the same thing, but neither of us seemed ready to be the one who said it first. Finally, the silence broke. The conversation slowly circled back to the question we had been avoiding for days. Not directly, not all at once, but piece by piece. Careful words. Small hints. The kind of conversation where every sentence feels like it carries more meaning than it should. I remember looking around the living room for a moment, almost as if seeing it differently for the first time. The couch where we sat had become more than just a place to relax. Somehow it had turned into the center of these late-night talks, the place where walls came down and honesty felt easier. But that honesty was starting to make things complicated. Because the more we talked that night, the clearer it became that both of us had noticed the same shift in our connection. What started as comfort and simple conversation had slowly turned into something harder to define. And that realization brought a new kind of tension. We weren't just talking about stressful days anymore. We were talking about feelings, expectations, and the fear of misunderstanding something that had once felt so natural. At one point, the conversation paused again. I could feel my mind racing, trying to figure out the right thing to say next. It felt like we were standing at the edge of a decision without fully realizing how big that decision might be. Then something unexpected happened. A phone notification broke the silence. It seemed like a small interruption, the kind that happens every day. But the moment the screen lit up, I noticed the expression on their face change slightly. Not dramatically, just enough for me to sense that something about that message mattered. They glanced at the phone for a second, then quickly placed it face down on the table. Normally, I wouldn't have thought much about it. But that small reaction created a strange feeling in the room. The conversation that had been flowing so naturally suddenly felt uncertain. I couldn't help wondering what that message had said, and more importantly, why it had changed the mood so quickly. A quiet doubt slipped into my mind. Were there things I didn't know? Because in that moment, I realized something unsettling. Just when I thought I understood what was happening between us, it felt like there was another layer to the story. And whatever that message meant, it was clear that the situation had just become even more complicated. For a few moments after the phone lit up, the room stayed quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't the comfortable silence we had grown used to. It felt tense, almost fragile, like one small moment could change everything. I tried to ignore it at first. After all, everyone gets messages. It could have been anything: work, a friend, a simple reminder. But the way the phone had been placed face down on the table made the moment feel heavier than it should have been. Finally, I spoke. I didn't ask directly about the message. Instead, I asked the question we had been circling around for days. The one that had been quietly shaping every conversation on that couch. What exactly is this, between us? The words came out softer than I expected, but once they were spoken, there was no taking them back. For a second, there was only the faint hum of the lamp in the corner of the room. Then they looked at me with a kind of honesty I hadn't seen before. They admitted something that surprised me. Those conversations on the couch hadn't just meant something to me. They had felt the same comfort too, the same sense of relief after long days, the same feeling that those moments were becoming the calmest part of life. Hearing that should have made things simple. But it didn't. Because right after saying that, they slowly picked up the phone from the table. "That message is part of the reason I've been quiet tonight," they said. My mind immediately filled with questions. For a brief moment, I prepared myself for the possibility that everything I had been feeling might have been misunderstood. Then they showed me the screen. The message wasn't from someone else stepping into the story. It wasn't a secret conversation or anything dramatic like I had imagined. It was a message about an opportunity. A job offer in another city. A chance to leave soon. Suddenly, everything made sense. The hesitation, the careful words, the tension that had been building over the last few evenings. They hadn't been avoiding the conversation because of confusion about our connection. They had been avoiding it because they didn't know how to say goodbye. That realization hit harder than I expected. All those nights on the couch, all those honest conversations, all the comfort we had found in that quiet corner of the living room, they had been happening just as life was preparing to pull everything in a different direction. But the final twist came in the next moment. They looked at me and said quietly, "I haven't accepted it yet." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The words hung in the air between us, "I haven't accepted it yet." It wasn't a promise, and it wasn't a decision either. It was simply the truth, spoken quietly in a room that had witnessed so many honest conversations. I looked around the living room again, almost the same way I had earlier that night. The soft lamplight, the quiet walls, and of course the couch where everything had begun. It was strange how such a simple place had turned into something meaningful. What started as ordinary evenings had slowly turned into deep talks, emotional comfort, and a connection neither of us had planned. I didn't know how to bring it up. They continued after a moment. These conversations, they started meaning more than I expected. And when that offer came, I realized things were more complicated than I thought. Hearing that made everything clearer. The tension of the past few days finally made sense. It wasn't confusion about feelings or uncertainty about our connection. It was the quiet pressure of a life decision waiting in the background. We talked for a long time after that. Not rushed, not emotional in a dramatic way, just honest. We spoke about the opportunity, about the future, and about what those evenings on the couch had truly meant to both of us. There was a calm understanding between us that hadn't been there before. The kind of understanding that only comes after difficult questions are finally asked. By the end of the conversation, something inside me felt lighter. We both realized something important that night. Sometimes people come into our lives at exactly the moment we need them, not to change our entire future, but to remind us what genuine connection feels like. Those late-night talks, the quiet support, the comfort during stressful days, they were real, and they mattered. The job decision would still have to be made. Life would keep moving forward, just like it always does. But what happened on that couch had already done something valuable. It reminded both of us that even in the middle of busy, complicated lives, simple conversations can bring unexpected comfort. And sometimes, the places we least expect, a quiet living room, an ordinary couch, can become the space where we rediscover honesty, trust, and the courage to face whatever comes next.